Notice how the Democrats aren't screaming for the Epstein files to be released.
Let's say the people who should be screaming at the top of their lungs with their Trump derangement syndrome are being very quiet, which I find interesting. And so this would be a very, very powerful tool or a weapon in the hands of anybody who can wield it. If you go public with it, you've given up that weapon. If I'm reading Trump and his administration correctly, I think their priority number one is to consolidate power at home. I think that Trump probably wants to get as close as possible to wielding absolute power as the American, quote unquote, democratic system will allow him to do.
Trump is out to undo the influence of the City of London and liberate the United States.
He's trying to undo this superstructure, right? This superstructure that's been put in place for this massive theft of the commons. And then the massive depopulation they're talking about, which locks in the theft of the commons. And then the world war that ensures that whoever survived the depopulation or whoever might be still around capable of tearing them out of their homes in the middle of the night with pitchforks and torches isn't alive anymore.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
Tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes a duty. So said Thomas Jefferson. Go to bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history and find out why it is a criminal offence to pay central government or local government taxes in the UK. bit.ly/lawful tax protest or bit.ly/make war history. And let's make war history. For the first time ever, Alex Krainer meets E.M. Burlingame. Hi, E.M.
Pleasure.
Alex.
Hi, Em. Hi, Rich.
Is this a grudge match or is this just an open dialogue?
This is an open dialogue.
Open dialogue.
We'll see where it goes, though. So, EM, people can contact you get in touch with you through X, and I'll have your Substack linked below, and Alex through X, Naked Hedgie, and your Substack. And I think, well, in a few days' time, fingers crossed, we're scheduled to record with Susan Kokinder from Promethean Action, and also some fella called Tom Luongo.
Tom, which one?
I think he's that Italian fellow.
Yeah. If he turns up,
predilection for cigars and board games.
Yes, I think that's the one. If he turns up, but he is on vacation, so I don't know, right? But otherwise, anyway, it's three of us. So thank you both for agreeing to do this. This has been scheduled for a while. I understand that both of you haven't been on a video together before, but I'm sure you're familiar with each other's work.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, seminal work. And I'd like to start with Epstein.
I knew it.
Oh, you would have said that whatever I said.
No, I knew you were going to say Epstein.
So I'm going to throw a couple of things in. So one is I just listened to a short clip by Stephen Kuhn, Kuhn, and I'm going to be recording with him on Saturday. And he does these short clips, and he has a Patreon, and it's just a short commentary. And then something that Alex Jones put out, and then I'd like to take your take on it. So Alex Jones said that one of the things that's happened is that this has split the MAGA movement, because there are some that are going along with it, it needs to be done or whatever, it's all part of the plan. And there are others like Tucker Carlson who are like, release the bloody files. And then Alex Jones was saying through his contacts, why they're not being released is because it would bring down the entire US government and administration, because it's such a large net. There's so many people involved high up. This is what Alex Jones is saying, right?
I don't agree with him, but
so like those that give instructions to MI6, CIA, and Mossad, they're the ones who's saying. And then Trump's realized, oh my god, this would bring down everything, and that's why he's not doing it. Now, Alex Jones says, look, I don't endorse this, I don't approve of this, but this is the thinking behind it. And then what Stephen Kuhn said. Notice how the Democrats aren't screaming for the Epstein files to be released.
Alex commented on this with Nima, I think, here earlier. Yeah.
Go on, Ian, sorry?
No, I believe Alex had this very comment with Nima earlier today or yesterday.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, terribly sorry. Go
ahead.
Yeah.
The let's say the people who should be screaming at the top of their lungs with their Trump derangement syndrome are being very quiet, which I find interesting.
Yes. Yes, 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 indeed. Now, Alex Jones said that he doesn't believe that Trump's on the Epstein lists. There's a investigative journalist in the UK, Johnny Vedmore. I've been on his channel, and he says he is. He never went to the island. He went to his homes in Manhattan, but he was smart enough to, I don't know, withdraw himself from that activity, from that enterprise, a long, long time ago. So I don't know if any of you want to take it away. What do you think is going on? What's it all about?
Alex, go ahead. I want to hear from the master, and then I'll give my thoughts. Yeah.
Well, okay. So I have to say, I never really expected that the Epstein list would be released to begin with, but I did imagine that they were going to, you know, have some token heads roll. You know, some minor names. Drag them through the mud and pretend that that was that. And here's why I think that, because, you know, if you think about what Jeffrey Epstein has done, and Ghislaine Maxwell and Wexner, and there's like a whole network of people who are involved with this, including probably MI6, CIA, the Mossad. They have taken a lot of trouble to create this network, and the point of it is to build up compromat against the targeted people, and they targeted powerful people in the government, in the military, in the media, probably, and so forth. And so this would be a very, very powerful tool or a weapon in the hands of anybody who can wield it. If you go public with it, you've given up that weapon. And so I would imagine that it's a pretty obvious conclusion, if you're in possession of this information and all these documents and evidence, that you might rather use it to your own best advantage. And if I'm reading Trump and his administration correctly, I think their priority number one is to consolidate power at home. And I think that Trump probably wants to get as close as possible to wielding absolute power as the American, quote unquote, democratic system will allow him to do. And it does seem to me that he is being much, much more successful with this than during his first term, because if we recall his first term, he was kind of all over the place politically. He wasn't able to do much. He was constantly being attacked in the media, but also in courts. He was being investigated, dragged through court trial after court trial, impeachments. Now, it seems to me that he is in a much more powerful position politically, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Epstein files weren't a part of it. I have to say that his big, beautiful bill, I didn't really think that would pass, but it did. Mm. So that's my take on it. Is it justified or is it not? I think that when people hear the words absolute power, they get very, very nervous. I don't have that qualm. It remains to be seen what Trump might do with all that power, if he's going to use it for good ends or for bad ends. But ultimately, even in absolutist systems, the rulers are always accountable to the people. They may abuse power, they may rule with an iron fist, but in the end, that can only go for so long. And we've seen absolute rulers in the past come to no good end for whatever reason. But you had people like Ceausescu, you had people like Trotsky. Obviously, right now I can't come up with very many. Mubarak. I can't come up with very many names, but I'm sure that if we thought about it, we could come up with many names of leaders who were absolutists, who ruled with an iron fist, and who ended up overthrown or killed or
Mussolini.
Oh yeah, Mussolini, obviously. Yes, thank you. So I think that abuse of power can only go so far, and it can only last for so long. But at the same time, when you have somebody who is, let's say, an absolute ruler in a political system, then they are in position to curb oligarchic abuse, which in Western liberal style democracies is absolutely impossible. The oligarchies absolutely rule. They are probably much more abusive in their exercise of their power than any visible ruler can be. And what I'm saying is an empirical fact. I'm not inventing that the United States and Great Britain and probably most European countries are in fact oligarchies hidden behind a facade of liberal democracies.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to take on that system, you can't contemplate a pillow fight. It's going to be ugly. And so in that struggle, you're going to have to resort to means that are, let's call it, unpalatable, that are harsh and ugly. But we're talking about oligarchies that have no qualms about assassinating presidents, about overthrowing governments, about
killing 1.5 million men in Ukraine.
Exactly.
And rising.
Exactly. And so these are not nice people. So if Trump is taking them on, and he's using the Epstein list to undermine them, to weaken them, to pit them one against the other, well, I can't say that I'm terribly disappointed with this. Obviously, and then if the list went public, let's suppose the list goes public, then what? There's going to be court cases.
There's going to be
and then what?
It goes to
a court case. There's been a court case. This young woman, I hate that I can't. Her name escapes me right now.
I don't remember her name either. I know exactly what you're talking about.
The blonde girl. So how did that go? Prince Andrew is still alive. He's still a free man, and she's dead. So what was the use in that?
You mean Virginia Giuffre?
Yeah.
Thank you, Virginia. Jeffrey? Giuffre?
Giuffre.
Yeah. So she's dead, and Prince Andrew is still alive. Got off scot-free.
Yeah,
because we have court systems that have double standard. If you're part of the oligarchy, you go scot-free in one way or another. If you're not, then what chance do you stand? So if the list went public, then people would bitch and moan and complain and call all these people evil. But in the end, I doubt that very much would happen to them in the end. And Trump would be giving away a powerful weapon. I'm not arguing in favor of this. I'm just speculating on why they didn't publicize the list.
Yeah. Ian?
Yeah, so I don't disagree with any of that at all, right? All of that is the great game. It's been going on for as long as we have human written language. But there is another force, and Rich and I have talked on this, or touched on it a couple of times, called the sport of kings. And we've kind of lost that over the last 400 years or so, the Westphalian model and the inglorious model in the English-speaking peoples, which are really the same thing, right? The sport of kings was played by very capable hereditary princes to check and keep in manageable control the great game. One has to ask, so blackmail only works on a very small number of people, compromat, right? And it only works one time. You only get one time to use that against that individual. And by using it against that individual, you might highlight other things in other people you don't want to call out right now because they're still serving you. So it turns out, and the Russians, the Soviets, forgive me, not the Russians, but the Soviets figured this out fairly early on, that compromat doesn't actually work so well. That's why they wound up just killing people. So what was the Operation Maxwell Epstein, and I call it that on purpose because it goes back to Robert Maxwell, her father, and Steve Cohn, and Meyer Lansky, and et cetera, back to the 1920s. What was Operation Maxwell Epstein really putting in place? Because that's all of the, most everybody that got caught up in all of that could be compromised. That's middle management people. Andrew's, His Highness is. His Royal Highness he's a prince. He's a minor prince. He's middle management. That's not going to bring down the crown, right? Bill Clinton, so what? He's the hired help. So what? He was the president of the United States. He's still a hired help. So what was really being put in place? Well, I don't know. They're sure pushing hard for World War III right now to cover for all the theft of the commons that they've been doing in the form of these wars and debts that they can't sustain anymore. And the fact that they've destroyed the entirety of the British Empire. They've come close in the United States, but they haven't gotten there yet. So it's interesting. So historically, what do? This Praetorian Venetian, Amsterdam, City of London tried to be Wall Street, but it's now getting rooted out. It now seems to be firmly entrenched in UAE, or at least trying to, set up the UAE as the new City of London, and Qatar is the new Langley or Tampa or whatever, Tampa's Special Operations Command and Langley CIA. What was Operation Maxwell Epstein really putting in place? It wasn't all the diddling of, it wasn't all this compromat. That was what you could burn. Why the hell did Epstein get rolled up in the first place? Why did Ghislaine get rolled up in the first place? Why didn't they get off like Diddy just did, etc.? Because they needed to burn them. So everybody would pay attention to this horrible thing, and it's legitimately horrible, terrible, but it pales in comparison to the millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people. If you add all of Europe and the United States alone, it's 1 billion people that have been totally and absolutely bankrupted for at least the next 4 generations if we set to paying off this debt. And how many of our up-and-coming young men have been killed or broken in wars, going all the way back to Vietnam? So if I was a prince, if I was a king, a czar, an emperor, right? If I had control of of a pool of information of all the middle management people that had done all these horrible things, but were the ones who were compromised because they were decision makers in certain systems that made all this other thing possible, and I wanted to undo this other thing, right? This global theft of the commons. And they, trillions of dollars of covert and clandestine operations networking. Back, Alex, something you said months ago in a conversation about why do the British have all this soft power? If I wanted to undo that soft power, which isn't so soft, right? It's just knives in the back and color revolution. It's not so soft. If I wanted to undo all of that, and I had this compromat on all these people that had information related to who did what and who made what decision and who looked the other way when this thing happened, etc., I would use that. I wouldn't release it, because if I release it, everybody's paying attention to the distraction, which is why they burned Epstein in the first place, to get everybody to go pay attention to that rather than what had actually been put in place, going back to Ghislaine's father and even before that, Meyer Lansky and Steve Cohen, etc.
Interesting. And I think the other thing I'd say is the temptation is too great. Why not?
I'm sorry?
The temptation to use it as a weapon against those who've been out to destroy you.
Middle management, though, wants to use it against other middle management. But there's a bigger thing, there's a sport above the game that has to be played where we don't let the pettiness of the management class, writ large, the managerial class, and we don't let them use knowledge and intelligence and compromat that would give them further power in that middle management game without undoing this superstructure, right? This greater thing that is vastly more dangerous to humanity.
Right. Okay. Now, the thing that I still struggle with is, so I accept, I think your argument, Ian, and yours, Alex, and also Tom's, that Trump is out to undo the influence of the City of London and liberate the United States.
He's trying to undo this superstructure, right? This superstructure that's been put in place for this massive theft of the commons.
Right.
And then the massive depopulation they're talking about, which locks in the theft of the commons, and then the world war that ensures that whoever survived the depopulation or whoever might be still around capable of tearing them out of their homes in the middle of the night with pitchforks and torches isn't alive anymore.
Okay. The thing that I can't square, I can't get my head around, makes no sense to me, is how he's operating with regards to Gaza and Netanyahu.
Some things you got to let go. So the problem is that so this is the other piece, right? Mm-hmm. It took over 100 years of very careful moving and machinations for Constantine to be in a position, Constantine, the Byzantine emperor, for Constantine to be in a position, set up 3-4 generations before Constantine, to be able then to draw out all the Praetorians on the Battle of Milvian Bridge, right? And to destroy them in battle. And this goes back to Kennedy, the very same kind of the very same thing that led Roman power in the late 2nd century, early 3rd century, to split the empire into 2 commands, remove the Praetorians from the east for all these other arguments, and then a century of preparation to be able to get all the Praetorians out, draw them out, make it obvious, and then defeat them in a single battle, and then hunt them down for the next 30 years or so, except the ones who fled to the lagoons that would become Venice, right? The very same thing started in the 1960s with the assassination of the 2 Kennedys. It's the very same thing that happened in Rome when certain members of the oligarchy realized we've got to get rid of this Praetorian system, this threat that is our own house guard, our own security, our own intelligence, our own, right?
Okay, and then what I'm reminded of, Ian, 2 things. Because we've done, I think this is our 3rd video. You and I did one,
so, yeah.
And then we did one with Graham Moore from the English Constitution.
Yeah.
Which is just absolutely fabulous conversation, because you're both on the same page and so familiar with the concepts, shared concepts and ideas. One is, and I said this in both those videos before, why wasn't history this interesting at school? And I think deliberately so we wouldn't know how we got here, right? And instead we had to learn the names of the kings and queens of England, not what they were really about. And then the other is, that I'm reminded that you also mentioned, is how the elites, the uber elites, have much, much longer memories, and they play a much longer game than plebeians like me are conscious of or aware of. So thank you for that. Alex, anything you want to say, or you want to take it somewhere else?
No, I think what Ian said was very fascinating, very, very relevant lessons of history. And I kind of tend to, agree. I'm not qualified to disagree or agree, but it resonates with the way I look at things and the way I understand things happening in the world. And yes, it's definitely clear that they play a very, very long game, and that they prepare these events decades in advance.
Even a century,
exactly.
Yeah.
And we see that now.
Yeah.
We clearly see that now. And then there's no obviously the Epstein, Maxwell, and all these people. That's that's one of the moving parts in the big scheme of things. Now, does Trump understand any of this?
I think he does.
I suspect that he does as well, because this is war. And
it's the real war. It's the actual real war.
The actual real war.
Yes.
And what does Sun Tzu say? All war is waged by deception.
Yes.
And one of the clever and effective means of deception is to pretend that you're dumb, to play dumb.
Gigante.
To-
You know the reference, Gigante, who was the head of a mob family who played that he was a functional idiot for decades.
Who was this, Ian?
Gigante. He was one of the heads of the five families, the mob families. I can't remember his first name. And that's exactly what he did, Alex. He played dumb, like mentally handicapped. And he would wander around the streets of New York in like a bathrobe and his slippers and stuff. And he got away so many times. And finally, ultimately, like 30, 40 years later, they finally figured out, yeah.
But he got a few things done in the meantime.
He consolidated power.
Yeah. Or even
Yeah.
Peter Falk in Columbo.
Oh, yeah, the bumbling. Yeah, Alex, I didn't mean to interrupt, but in support of what you're saying, you were talking to Nima earlier, and I listened actually earlier, and the thing that kept coming to my mind when you were talking about Trump was Gigante. Well, where was Gigante? New York. When Trump was a kid.
Right. Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and it is, I mean, people really do think Trump is dumb and stupid and an oaf and clumsy. And I'm like, wait a minute. The guy, he fended off all these attacks against him in his first term. And then he's one of the few presidents to get elected a second time round after a gap. And he's come back in smarter and stronger than he did before. He's negotiated like that peace to end the 30-year war between Congo and Rwanda that killed upwards of 5 million people. He's made some very, very smart moves.
Well, let's go back even further. If they had anything legitimate on him, they would have burned him with that a long time ago. They could make up a lot of stuff. How do you go from being who he was, a young prince of New York City, to who he is today without having lived? To Alex, something you've said numerous times, he doesn't need to have the deep, comprehensive philosophical framework. He's a gangster. And Rich, that's just something you say. And he's a very good gangster.
Yes.
And honestly, we need a guy right now who's a gangster, a multi-time divorcee, and somebody who's been through major bankruptcies.
Okay, why?
Because those are the skill sets we need to break away from this superstructure, right? Because what are we doing? We are divorcing Europe.
Okay.
And that's a nasty contested divorce with a mean, cruel, forget my language, bitch, right? And she's really good. This is like her fourth major divorce. She's got really good attorneys. She's got millions of dollars to burn. This is her last divorce, so she wants billions out of it, right? So that's one. Second, we're bankrupt. Straight the hell up bankrupt. Now we can work through, we got assets and we got capabilities and we can renegotiate things and we still got people who would lend to us if we get our house in order, etc. So you need somebody who's been through a bankruptcy. But you're dealing with people who might be in your own security so you got to be Michael Corleone as well, because you don't know in your own house is disloyal. Yeah. So you got to do loyalty tests. You got to be a gangster. You got to do loyalty tests. You got to let the other five families, the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese, the Brazilians know, you don't mess. We're fixing our house right now, but you move after us, we're going to hurt you. Like we'll send B-2 bombers from, Mississippi or Minnesota or wherever the hell they came from, and we'll bomb you. And there ain't much you can do about it. Now, we probably can't do beyond that, but that's all we're really got to do if we got the right intelligence and drop those bombs on the right place, right? So you got to be a gangster. Straight up gangster, New York City kind of mob boss kind of gangster. You got to have been through some nasty divorces with some nasty freaking women with unbelievable attorneys and all of that stuff. And you got to have gone through some nasty bankruptcies and figured out how on the other side, every one of those bankers and investors reinvested in banking with you again and made fortunes off of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, if he made a fortune in a rotten system, in one of the most competitive, cutthroat real estate markets in the whole world, that doesn't quite square with being dumb, does it?
No. And you did it in such a way that you haven't done any of the corruption, any of the fraud, any of the other money. No. You did it in such a way they went through all of your financials, all of your tax returns, everything, and they couldn't use any of that against you. So they had to make shit up. They had to invent interpretations of the common law to make that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I know
you don't do that by being dumb. You don't have to be a philosopher. You got to be a gangster. Rich, to your
that fractal, that heuristic works really well.
Yeah.
Really well. Okay, all right. Do you want to move on to anything else? Any other commentary? Some other area?
Are you doing the interview or?
Yeah, no, I'm facilitating a dialogue here. I just want to get your take.
So, Alex, I'm very interested in your, if I may, when I listen to you over the last several months, you're getting closer and closer and closer, I think, to the sport of kings, right? We haven't seen the sport of kings played until Putin for a very long time in the Western world.
Ian, just for clarity and for the viewers' benefit.
Alex and I completely understand, but for the viewers.
What is the sport of... Yeah, exactly. For the viewers, yeah, you know.
Yeah. My cat's running around here. Yeah.
Sport of kings. What is... how would you describe that?
Well, let's talk the great game, right? The great game is all the things that you and Tom and some others speak so eloquently on and very well and in great detail. But that's not the real power in the world. They want us to believe it is. But that's the managerial class doing managerial class stuff. The sport of kings is played by a very few number of people. This is why the Venetians become Dutch, become City of London, have done everything in their power over the last 1,000 years to remove hereditary princes. Because a good hereditary prince plays what? Sport of kings. And what is the sport of kings doing? It's looking at all of the great game and going, one, how do I keep that from getting out of control? And two, having to live and operate, physically live, and not get myself or my kids or my grandkids murdered or sold off into slavery or hooked on drugs and prostituted out, and all those ways that you get really compromised beyond being an evil person who should just be shot in the face. But having to live within that environment with a hostile court, and I don't mean the judiciary, but, you know, in the old noble sense, how do I move in that way so I don't get stabbed in the, you know, in the deck or poisoned or you know, my kids and family, my heirs don't get killed by one of my concubines and all of that? How do I play the ones playing the great game so I make sure that the kingdom and the people sustain? How do I survive? First things, how the hell do I physically survive? And how do I ensure that my heirs survive without selling out?
Yeah, or if I take it down, say, to the level of a family, where you've got aunts and uncles and brothers and sons and everything, and they're all struggling to ensure that their bit of the family prevails and survives. And then you head out on a much larger scale, that same pattern of behavior, and you extend it through space and time. That's the sport of kings.
Yeah, okay, so wonderful. So let's take it down to a family, right? And let's do it, you know, Alex, you're a finance guy, hedge fund guy, so you dealt with a lot of family offices. You're probably engaged with family offices. There are dynamics that are at play in a family office, you know, an old noble house, or in today's family offices, multi-generational family offices, multi-family, multi-generational. Okay. As the final decision maker in that family office, you've got all kinds of forces you have to deal with. And very much, Rich, what you said, I got a brother who thinks he should have more say in you know, the family office. I've got nieces and nephews who think they should be getting paid out more. I've got other families who, you know, they're in competition with my family, so they're trying to convince one of my sons or daughters to betray, you know, the family, come work for them, or give up inside information. And then I've got governments that, you know, because my family's got businesses all over the world, I've got governments that want some control or some say over what I'm doing, and they're, you know, they've got one of my security guys, probably my head of security, comes out of the SEALs or the Green Berets or the CIA or MI6 or SAS, and so they got friends that are coming and saying, hey, you need to give us this information. You know, so I've got all these forces, and it all comes down, power-wise, it all comes down to one thing. If anyone in any form or fashion can articulate that I don't make good decisions, then they can come at me to diminish my power and capacities as the, you know, ultimate say over the control and distribution of those assets. That's just one family. And Rich, to what you're saying, now scale it up to several families, scale it up to a nation. That's the sport of kings. I need to be able to operate in that unbelievable competitive environment that starts in my own damn family, right? My own house. And I need to do it in such a way that I get things done. Things have to get done, and they have to get done cost effectively and timely. But I have to do it in such a way that I'm dealing with all that great game forces, all that competitive, conflicting forces in such a way that when it really comes right down to it, people can say all kinds of things, they can do all kinds of things, they can put them out, I'll sue their ass, we'll deal with that later in court. But when it comes right down to it, anybody who would be a real threat to me, inside or out, needs to know, yeah, actually, I make good decisions, and I'm ruthless. And I know how to play your game that you're playing, right? This information space, narrative space, this estrogen kind of way of warfare, I know how to play that against itself. That's the sport of kings.
Okay, but when I asked about the sport of kings, obviously for the benefit of the viewers, I actually interrupted you.
I can't remember where we were.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. It's the sport of kings, right? What's happening is we are having king level sport, sportsmen.
What about Putin?
Come at Putin, Xi, Khomeini. I don't know about this current one, but the previous one certainly, right? And there's Orban, right? What's the Serbian leader? Vucic. There's a couple others, right? So it's not a surprise it's the Eastern Europeans that are stepping up because they've been forced through this bloody collapse, this divorce, and they lost, and they don't want to ever go through that again. And they're just getting back on their feet, right?
Yeah.
And these are ancient peoples, and they're going back to their history because they're not listening to the lie of the managerial class, the great game, and going, no, there's another game above. There's a sport above. Let's go to that, right? So we are returning to the sport. The sport of kings is returning to the world stage. And it is only the sport of kings that can counter. You can't completely counter, but can maneuver, shape, and guide the great game of all these operational level managerial class fucks. Excuse my language.
That's fine. We have Tom here often.
My proper English. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so it's the managerial class being the City of London, the Venetian bankers, the Amsterdam bankers,
governments writ large,
intelligence agencies. Okay. All right. Now, you mentioned Europe. You mentioned Europe earlier, right? One of the things that Trump has done, I think he said 10% tariffs on Europe, on the European Union. Now, I thought he was going to do more in order to break.
We're still in the divorce. You don't do the ultimate threat while you're in the divorce.
And also, notice that since Donald Trump came to the White House, the dollar depreciated by, I want to say something like 14, 15%. So that, that makes European goods in the United States, without any other measure, 15% more expensive.
Yes.
And it makes American goods in Europe 15% cheaper. So the 10% tariffs is the insult to the injury.
That's right. That's right. That's the public insult. Yeah. You came at me, lady, in the divorce court. Yeah. I outmaneuvered you here, but I also want you and any of your backers to know I also hurt you over here.
And he can hurt them a hell of a lot more because the United States, through Federal Reserve swap lines, has completely the European economy by the cojones for international trade because they need dollars, to buy oil, copper, whatever, everything
commodities,
traded on these global commodities markets. And European banks are rapidly running out of US dollar liquidity. And if it wasn't for the pretty much open US swap lines, courtesy of the Fed, Europe would be in a sea of trouble. The procurement, who would sell them oil for euros? Not very many. And so the United States can just cut that spigot like that, and they all know it. So that's a tremendous power that the United States has over the Europeans, which is, I think, why all these people like Mark Rutte are now so groveling to this extent that's actually painful to watch.
Anybody who's been in this kind of divorce is going to come up to a point in time where she comes begging you to end the divorce, either to stay with, or I might or might not have been through this myself, right? At some point, in the divorce, she's going to come to you and and then the problem is you can't actually take her back because it will ruin and destroy the family. And so you have to politely, carefully, calmly let her know there's no recourse to go back anymore. And you have to do that knowing she's going to unleash hell in your family. Her and her attorneys and everybody backing and the other families that are thinking we can take this family down and all of that. They have to, right? She has to, because maybe at some point you'll buckle. I don't think this guy will, if he stays alive.
Yeah.
And that's why most of what we're seeing around, including the statement about the Epstein list, etc., are loyalty tests. Like Michael Corleone. If you know there's a mob war coming in your own house, and you have to be able to focus and concentrate on that, you got to loyalty test the hell out of everybody. In all kinds of sophisticated, complex ways. You got to probe and test, and that's, in this case, financially, militarily, legally, socially, politically, all these ways. You got to know who in your own house, your immediate house, and then the greater family, who the hell's loyal. Because when you finally tell her no, when that moment happens, and we're pretty much there, we're not quite there yet. When we said, and it's not him, it's the American people saying, we're done supporting your lifestyle, Europe. We're done. United Kingdom, the British Isles, British Empire, what's left of it, Europe, we're done. We cannot support your lifestyle anymore. You're on your own. The divorce is going to happen. It's final. When that happens, they unleash hell.
Yeah.
And we are vulnerable in all kinds of ways. In all kinds of ways that people who play the game kind of understand. And the fact that we don't have the examples of people playing the sport of kings so much anymore that isn't vilified as, this evil Putin or this evil Xi or this evil or the stupid Orban or whatever the hell people are saying. But as we haven't had a relationship between people and princes for so long that the people don't even remember the sport of kings. All they know is the great game. And so we have to loyalty test Americans and people in the administration and in the government and allies overseas and all this stuff, because we are telling her irrefutably, this divorce is happening. Here's what we can do in the settlement, but we can't do any more than that. We also know that she's batshit insane. She's set on total destruction, right? An angry, drunk, angry woman at the bar. And she's going to go for blood. And oh, by the way, she has to. Because there are some times when she goes for blood, the man backs down.
Yeah. Such an apt description for the European Union here. It's so apt. It really is. No, I saw something.
Well, they even voted a president that kind of fits that description, right? Or Ursula von der Leyen. She's kind of like, when Ian is saying this, that face.
She's got just enough beauty for one more divorce, one big payout in a divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's got to go for it.
Now, just
never be able to marry into that kind of money and influence again.
Yeah. Now, just on that, I saw something across X today, how Macron has invited Keir Starmer for the UK to rejoin the European Union.
You know who those two remind me of? Remember the SNL ambiguously gay duo from the 90s? That's who those two remind me of.
They're like that. You throw in Zelensky, they got a threesome going. Right. Oh my God. Now, my take on it is that the EU is doing that in order to leech what wealth there is remaining in the British Union.
Yes. Well, not just but the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
So there is still immense, and Alex, this goes to a lot of things you've talked about for the last year or so that I've heard you talk. There is still immense soft power in the British Empire, right? Because, and Rich, you're Pakistani. There's immense relationships that go back in the former Greater India that go back centuries that are still there. The relationships are still there. The obligations are still there. The commingling of debts and incomes and just fuckery is still there. So there's still immense soft power in the British Empire. And there is more that can be wrung out of the various pieces before the divorce is final. And this gets to the conversation Tom and I had. The British Empire, what remains, is set up for the final step 7 of the kill chain, and the collapse, the full formal collapse and abandonment.
Yes.
And it breaks my heart, right?
Yep. Alex?
Yes, I've been trying to work it out, and what I see is that the British act in ways that are, well, I could say very sophisticated in a devious kind of way.
Duplicitous.
When they
estrogen.
Sorry,
estrogen. It works like estrogen.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's they go into these target countries, and I observed the example of Bosnia at the moment. They've designated Balkans as the new front in their war against Russia. Okay, and so what do? They don't go sending troops there because they hardly have any, and I think that's fascinating in itself, because if you were bent on resurrecting the British Empire, wouldn't you want to build a big army? They've done exactly the opposite. But what they do have is they have a very large network of people that could fit into the description of spies, of like diplomats, but not overt diplomats, like covert diplomats, secret diplomacy. They have this whole system of using non-government organizations and private contractors, and then they always go with the outreach is, oh, we're going to help you with this and with that, and they start moving money into these countries, and these countries are typically impoverished. So if you show somebody $1,000, you can get them to sing. You can get them to tell you all kinds of things. And one thing I've noticed out of personal experience, because I've been in the hedge fund industry for 15 years. I'm no longer in the hedge fund industry, since the pandemic. But I've been in the hedge fund industry long enough, and it's very London centric, kind of, and there was a point in time when I had an office in London and I set up a hedge fund there, and I was dealing with a lot of people in the legal system, in the administration, in these regulatory bodies, and with a lot of counterparts, brokers and administrators and whatnot. And I've noticed that the modus operandi very often is making all kinds of promises that they have absolutely no intention of fulfilling ever. But they are so good at stringing you along forever on these false promises that somehow never get fulfilled, but they're so enticing, and you so hope that they will make good on it, and they sound so great, and it could change your life, that you kind of find yourself always giving them the benefit of the doubt. And they're always so nice, and they're always so polite and friendly and chatty. And then when the time comes, they have no qualms whatsoever to stab you in the back. And not only that, then they look at you and they're like, hey, my friend, how's everything? Because they are convinced that if the roles were reversed, you would do exactly the same thing to them. So it's all perfectly normal and all perfectly legit. And I think that for people who are not used to this ethos, they're taken with it. And so, if you study how the war in former Yugoslavia happened in the 1990s, you realize that the whole thing was stage managed by this British secret diplomacy, like down to the minutia. Mm-hmm. The European officials were kind of tagging along, always a little bit confused about what needs to be done and what shouldn't be done. The Americans were half interested, half not. Everybody continued to defer to this handful of British officials like Lord Carrington, Lord David Owen, Foreign Minister Douglas Hurd. They were playing everybody. And they blatantly favored the Serbs. And it seems to me this, I can't even quite work it out exactly because it's never stated out in the open. But I think that their idea was to enable the Serbs to create a greater Serbia as like this dominant entity in the Balkans, and then maybe have a small version of the master blaster relationship with them. And so the fact that the British were favoring the Serb was blatant and obvious. What the agenda was not blatant and obvious, but in the process, they very badly wronged Croatians, and much more so the Muslims, right? 30 years later, they are best friends forever with the Bosnian Muslims in the Sarajevo government, and they're enemies with the Serbs. And it's as if nobody remembers what happened 30 years ago. Go, Ian.
Okay. This is a wonderful segue to what I'm seeing, right? I've written here recently. So first off, I want to go back to the mechanisms. The pretty girl shows up. She shows the guy who never had the attraction, never had a girl that pretty, pay attention to him. And she gets him to do all kinds of things. And then he's thinking he's going to be able to sleep with her. And then it never comes about. And at some point, some guy comes and punches him in the face. And then she's not there to go, well, no, that's my guy. No. Right? That's the British Empire. That's the Europeans. That's these estrogens, right? And the problem is she's still pretty till she's not pretty anymore, right? So the problem is the British are still pretty. They're not as pretty as they used to be. Middle-aged lady, she's aging well, right? But, okay. That's the mechanism. So now I want to go to
that's a good metaphor, actually. That's kind of the way it works.
Yeah, it's how it works, right?
It's the difference that I see in households where there's domestic abuse. The difference how a man perpetrates domestic abuse, hard, violent, physical, threatening, loud, versus a woman who's manipulative, coercive, controlling.
Yes.
Likely do it that way.
Yeah. Use what you got.
Power, yeah.
Right. Use what you got. All right, so now I want to go to the Muslim thing because it's very interesting. So I believe this was all set up and done on purpose and I think the whole global war on terror was an immediate carry on from it because the Christian world is destroyed and done and gone. Except for those Orthodox fuckers, right? But the Christian world has been completely devoured and used up in the last 300 plus years.
Okay,
why do
you say that, Ian, please?
Europe's bankrupt. The United Kingdom's bankrupt. They almost bankrupted the United States. Europe and the United Kingdom couldn't field 100,000 fighting men. Literally.
Yeah.
They can't even fight their own internal. They couldn't fight back against forced immigration, much less a war.
Yeah.
And the only country that had the manpower that were willing to fight a war, they just burned 1.5 million of those in frickin' fighting Russia. That wasn't done about Russia. None of this fight has anything to do with Russia at all. This is about making sure that when the parasites, the financialists, leave Europe and the European peoples and the English-speaking peoples, once and for all, there isn't any force left there to fight them. Because what have they done now? What was the global war on terror? The global war on terror was a takeover of the Islamic world. They have embedded themselves in the UAE as their headquarters, with Qatar as their military martial what I call the Devil's Legions, but the new intelligence headquarters. The new HQ for the new MI6 is Qatar. The new HQ for the City of London, the Bank of England, the Dutch Phoenicians is UAE.
Okay.
And the new manpower to threaten the world with terrorism and warfare are the Muslims.
Okay. Now the clues to that, because Alex, you mentioned in a previous video how Qatar was a former British territory. It's where Hamas are HQ'd. So MI6 will be in there setting up.
Well, MI6 has a HQ there. CIA has a headquarters there. SOCCENT, Special Operations Command, CENTCOM, Central Asia is headquartered there. SOCCENT, or CENTCOM itself is headquartered there. So this isn't hyperbole. This is all of this Devil's Legions intelligence community headquarters are already in Qatar, and they've already been running the Devil's Legions out of Qatar over the last 10, 15 years. And if you want an example of how all this plays out moving forward, what just went down in Syria and who did they use? And if you want to ensure that whatever Europeans are remaining don't come and tear you out of the Islamic world, what's the part of the world you've got to stir up ancient troubles in? Eastern Europe. You got to stir up the Muslim, Christian, ethnic and religious hatreds there to restore that crescent as this, religious war, holy war, buffer between the Islamic world and the quote unquote Christian world. None of this has anything to do with Russia. They knew they couldn't take Russia.
Okay, interesting. Alex?
It's my take. Now, of course, if they can maybe do it, great.
Yeah, if they can get away, get.
If they can do it, great. But if not, let's kill off all the fighting men. That's why they're trying to draw the Americans in, etc. Let's kill off all the fighting men so they can't come into the Islamic world and they can't undo us. They can't rip us out of here.
Yep.
And they can't fight back and against the terrorist organization, because the global war on terror was a mob war that took over all the terrorist organizations. It's all now under control of Langley and frickin' MI6 and the CIA. Totally. That's what the GWAT was. And we destroyed any leadership in the Islamic world under in a 25-year-long war that might stand up to their power in the Islamic world, just as they did to the continental Europeans in the 1600s and the English in the late 1600s, mid to late 1600s. So now the Islamic world's been set up to to be built up and to be the bully boys and the martial power and the terrorist power around the world until they're all used up. And then who knows where they'll abandon them for. This is what they do. They've done this all the way back to Rome. Yeah, sorry, Max. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually very fascinating, because I analyze things at the level of, as you call it, managerial class. But what you're laying out is kind of the layer above, which is the occult oligarchies' game plan.
And the cult itself is cover for action, right? They want you looking at the occult. They have their own religion. It's financialism. I mean, it matches just right down with Judeo-Christian belief systems, but it's the worship of wealth and money.
Right.
Right. The occult stuff is like the Epstein thing. It's real and it's there and there's evil shit and we got to counter it, but it's a distraction from real power.
Yeah. And I think that in that sense, they absolutely do care about Russia, because Russia is the one power in this world which has remained faithful to its religion, which is also capable of defeating the empire, actually, and which also happens to have between $75 and $90 trillion estimated of natural resource wealth, and the world's most educated population that you want to enslave. And when I say enslave, I'm not even exaggerating, because when they took over Russia in the 1990s and they ruled it for a period of about 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
The average salary in Russia was $58 or $56, I forget exactly which number, per month. So that's what, $2 a day?
Yeah,
that's like the way down at the World Bank poverty line for a developed nation. That's dismal, and that was done in the space of 9 years.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt whatsoever that if they manage to regime change Russia and put some Volodymyr Zelensky into the Kremlin, that this is what Russia would be again in another 10 years.
Oh, they would genocide them. I mean, they would straight up, because the Russians so I don't disagree with it at all. Because the Russians were able to fall back on their civilization, and as 140 different ethnic groups realized, no, we're civilization, and they could reconnect in that, because communism was sent in there to destroy that, and it didn't. Same with China, right? Exactly the same with China. Exactly the same with Persia, right? They sent in all kinds of things. I actually have concerns and questions about the Islamization of Persia, right? The Persian peoples, and if that wasn't a British operation, because it sure as hell seems like it. And the Persians I know that I grew up with when I was a young man in the United States, they hate all of that, right? So Russia fell back on its civilization and was able to come back together and resist all of that. And that's what scares the hell out of them.
But you see,
because
I don't think that they necessarily want to, how do you call it, depopulate them, genocide them, because Russia's resources are not going to extract themselves and ship themselves to the West. They need the labor force. And as I read the Gulag Archipelago, I never finished it all the way because it's super long.
Yeah.
But I had a very strong impression, as Solzhenitsyn explains how people were ending up in the gulags. It was
voluntary. Yeah.
No, it was they were just accusing them according to these certain provisions of the law, and there was like provision number this, whatever, subversion or being counter-revolutionary or whatever it was. And they would have these court cases that lasted 5 minutes. They would drag the man out. They say like, hey, well, guilty, 10 years in the gulag. I think that whole operation was to populate the Siberian territories with slave workforce.
Totally agree.
They could export the raw materials. And then what did they do? They sold the raw materials in which currency? US dollars.
US dollars. Yeah, British
So
pound.
now, if this was a real revolution, and the Soviet Empire was a real thing, because there was a period of time when they commanded this massive part of the world, like more than 300 million population, super rich in terms of natural resources, and they had a lot of countries that were in their orbit, loyal to them, from the Warsaw Pact, from many African countries, Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, like vast stretches of the world. And the most obvious thing to do if you're an empire is to say, we're going to sell you our products and our resources, but we need you to pay us in rubles, because that's a massive and obvious lever of power. No, they created the whole euro-dollar system, obviously in collaboration with the city of London.
Yeah.
And the euro-dollar system became bigger than the US dollar system in the United States. And then the interest rate was set in London. Isn't all that kind of curious, and doesn't it require an explanation?
So the Sport of Kings guy in me says the surest sign that it was all an operation was the fact that we didn't extricate the cousin to the King of England, and we let his whole family get killed. Because otherwise he would have been what? Government in exile.
Yes.
You can't have that, right? You can't have that, because that would be working to counter all of the economic largesse of the occupier. To me, that's the surest sign, again, at the level of Sport of Kings. How do you play the people playing the great game, that all of that was an operation? Same thing in China, right? If we were serious about anti-communism in China, we would have backed Chiang Kai-shek. We didn't. We backed Mao. So this gets to the financialist kill chain, right? You enslave people, you set them up, you do all of that, you harvest as much as you can. There's a great movie called Jupiter Ascending that I think everybody should watch, because in a very interesting articulation, it explains the financialist kill chain. How people are just, and now it says it, anyways, I think everybody should watch that movie with this concept of the financialist kill chain in mind, about how entire populations just get set up, right? Grown, built up, expanded just to be harvested, right? China was the exact same thing. There's a great documentary called The China Hustle. And I might or might not know people that are involved. It might or might not be why I left China and gave up investment banking and did a midlife crisis in special forces. Because exactly what happened to post-Soviet, post-Venetian, post-financialist operation in Russia was happening in China in the 2000s. In the 2000s into 2007, 2008, when the local powers there, just like the Russians in Russia in the late 90s, said, we got to stop this, or we're going to be gutted. And they worked to elevate Xi, they worked to take out corruption. All the stuff that happened in Russia happened to China just 10 years later, right? It was the same process, the same thing. China was being set up like $70 trillion of the wealth accumulated in China fled and came all the way back to the United States through Evergreen and these other shams. I've been in the places where they built concrete, cities with no windows and doors. And then they got the Chinese labor to invest in those as second and third properties. I saw it in 2000s. That's why I left. I was like, I can't participate in this. I'd rather go kill people. I say that is not necessarily the truth, but it felt better to go fight bad guys, quote unquote bad guys, than to do that and play in that. So I fundamentally agree that you're right. If they can get away with it, they would enslave. Part of the problem that they have now, though, is that, and this is actually a benefit to us, those who would play the sport of kings and really counter the great game, is they are overconfident in AI and robotics. And they think that they can get away with they can do away with the populations and still have the same kind of. So, Alex, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. You said in AI, I just added and themselves. They're overconfident in themselves.
The bitch in the divorce court thinks she's the baddest motherfucker on the planet.
Yeah, and I think they're very, very wrong about this because as far as I've been paying attention to things, they're not really smart.
But they don't have to be. They got a 2,000-year infrastructure that's been incrementally improved and has never been taken down. And in the 1600s, across all of the most advanced, I don't want to take away from India's advancements at the time and China, et cetera, but, for where we all come from, the people behind all of this, Europe, particularly like Germany and the United Kingdom, what would become the United Kingdom, were the most advanced places on Earth, in our parts of the Earth, and the most sophisticated, literate peoples. And we were duped. And we've been utterly destroyed over the last 300 years, and we haven't been able to work this out. So I can't say that they're not. So here's my thought, because I've fallen for it a lot. Clever people will beat intelligent people 9 times out of 10. Because the intelligent person who has a soul and has a conscience is always trying to figure out where's this coming from? What's this going on? All you need is a clever person on this side that doesn't have a soul and a conscience. And 9 times out of 10, they'll beat you. But that one time matters. And if we can, the conversations and dialogue that we're having, if we can get this to people and figure out how the hell do we get this down to something that people can really connect with, right? That's why I'm like doing the bitch in the court and all this other stuff, because a lot of people have been through that. But if we can get this down to something that people can understand, maybe Europeans and those of European descent can finally, and those around the world that are, extensions like the greater Indians, et cetera, of our civilization now, can maybe finally break free. We'll never be able to eradicate it because it's a neuropathology, right?
Now, Ian, I have a question because this has been bothering me. I have a very vague sense of the history of the British Isles.
Mm.
I've read some about it. I don't know what I believe, what I don't believe.
Most of it's lies.
But let's say that vaguely, I tried to figure out who were the Celts. What were the Druids? What existed there before the Roman times? And I just got this impression that it was something really special and really important, which is what drew the Romans all the way out there, kind of in the middle of freaking nowhere. The money was coming from the Levant, from the Middle East.
Yeah, exactly.
Something drew them there, and it was really important.
Yeah.
And I think that they never let it go.
No.
And we go to the Inglorious Revolution.
Yeah.
That was 1688, and then Bank of England since 1694. And from then on, it's like they raised the place to the ground. But there was also something going badly wrong before that, because you had this whole enclosure movement, which already kind of pauperized the people who belonged there and made them into like serfs.
Yeah.
And then there was already Queen Elizabeth I, who was issuing indulgences to these adventurers to go and scoop up Negroes along the coast of Western Africa and then sell them. So like the whole slave trade started. And Quinn, like the first one who got the indulgence, a letter saying like, you may do this, like he kind of presented her with a business plan. I'm going to sail down the coast of West Africa. I'm going to load up my ships with the Negroes. I'm going to sell them and I'm going to make you loads of profit. And she was like, well, that's a splendid idea. Here's a letter. You may do that legally. John Hawkins. John Hawkins.
Yeah.
But then there was like a lot of that happening. And then, like slave trade was one thing. Then, the Spaniards were plundering the Central and South America. So the next thing was like,
privateering.
Privateering.
Yeah.
And so something has gone off the rails a long time ago. And I have and I don't know this. I'm pulling it out of my back end. But it seems to me that it was the Roman connection that never quite took their claws out of there.
Yes.
That poison always remained present there, and it was always predatory. And when they figured out that they needed ships, that they needed cheap labor force to build those ships, that they needed raw material, the iron and everything, that they decided like, we need to get these good people off the land. We need to take the land from them. We're going to take the land for ourselves. And we're going to offer them employment, but they're going to do what we tell them to do.
This is okay. So, I personally believe more and more that feudalism is the only counter to this. That feudalism was a direct refutation of Rome. We will never again, as peoples in these areas, allow a centralized power control. Because this type of slavery inevitably emerges. This passive-aggressive, genocidal slavery emerges. Tax, wage, and debt slavery.
Unless you have a king.
Well, that's what I'm saying, feudalism, right? So unless you have a strong prince with a strong bond of people
who, I see
right, who understand all 7 elements of power, right, and how to play that, and they maintain the relationship and the trust and the bond with their people. You can't, dominate, and they know how to work the sport of kings amongst other princes and to manage the great game, which is really the slaver mind in their own people, in their own house, etc. Give me a second. I wrote an article called Liberal Democracy. I can't remember the exact title. It's up on Substack and etc. But it was about how liberal democracy was created by the Venetians to bring down Aristotle, the hereditary princes, because the hereditary princes were the only thing standing between re-enslavement to the new Rome, the Vatican, what would become the Vatican, right, and Rome, and the people. And so in order to re-enslave Europe and then ultimately the British Isles, you had to bring down known princes, right? Down with princes. And you had to bring about liberal democracy, which is anything but. Because that was the thing that stood between the people and this re-enslavement to the second Rome was feudalism. It was hereditary princes who would stand and fight. You want to try and enslave my people? You want to try and, right? When we look at Henry VIII, and I think, Rich, you and I have talked on this prior, right? When we look at Henry VIII, I don't believe, because not the records themselves, but the interpretations of his actions, et cetera, have been reinterpreted, et cetera. But if I look at his actions, again, from the mind of the Sport of Kings, he was trying to get rid of the Catholic Church, was the unconventional warfare, Green Beret infiltration, and re-enslavement of the English peoples, the peoples of the British Isles, to Rome. And he had to go to war with that. And how do you get your people to do that? So you use the excuse of divorces and et cetera, but he broke the people free. Right? And Alfred the Great and his son Edward the Confessor and Athelstan stood up the English common law, the dooms of Alfred. He'd been in Charlemagne's court. And he's like, we're not going to do that. I'll be a Christian. I'll adhere to Christian principles, but we're not doing that. And he stood up the dooms of Alfred, which were that 3 principles. Every man is sovereign, no matter if he's a king or a commoner, even the lowest commoner. Every man is sovereign. Now, you got to be individually, responsibly sovereign, right? You can't just be I won't say it, but I had something untowards that would come to mind. I probably shouldn't say it, but every individual is sovereign. In order to be sovereign, you have to have the right to private property because the first property is self, right? You can't be sovereign if you don't own yourself, your thoughts, your mind, your energy, your outputs. And in order to maintain that, to keep those two principles real, you have to have a balance of power between the hereditary princes, right up to the king, and the middle class, the oligarchs, the great game players, and the people. And those were coded into English law to this very day. And that was a wonderful conversation with Graham, and thank you, Rich, for that. Okay? Those were three principles laid down to ensure that what had happened in 44 AD when the Romans came, and what the Romans had done for 400 years, roughly 400 years, in the British Isles would never happen again. And not even through the vector of the second Rome, which is the church, the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Catholic Church, right? We jump forward to the 1500s to Henry VIII, and what was all of this Catholic stuff? What was all of this fighting? What was all of this really? How did England break free of the cardinals of Rome, right? How did English peoples not have a second tax, not have a foreign power in the form of a religion controlling the people of the islands and superseding the king himself and the nobles? The problem is you have unloyal nobles. You have people who are playing the great game, and people say that Henry VIII was batshit crazy. Maybe. He kind of reminds me of Trump. And maybe he had to play that way, right? And history gets rewritten. It's like, maybe he actually was pretty damn good at what he was doing. Maybe what he was trying to do was actually ensure that the people of the British Isles weren't re-enslaved to Rome.
Yep.
Right? Problem is that his son dies young. His daughter, Mary, who's batshit insane, comes on the throne. She messes up a whole lot of things, so the great game starts inflating again. And then Elizabeth gets on the throne, and it's just total. It's near collapse. Everything's about on the verge of a second War of the Roses, and she's trying to figure out how the hell do I maintain power, and how do I keep the Holy Roman Empire from reconquering the Isles, etc. And how the hell do I pay for all of that? Well, estrogens think very different than testosterones. There's shit that we wouldn't do as men, because we know the ultimate price. But women and unhealthy estrogen-laden males will do that because they don't, they can't think that far ahead. So I believe very much what you're articulating is that the downfall of the English-speaking peoples happened under the Tudors. It did begin under her father, because when her father was able to throw out the Second Roman Empire, of course that brought all this energy and effort and focus on, we've got to retake these people. They figured out, though, they couldn't do it through the Catholic vector. So what they do, they did it through the House of Orange. And they did it through banking and finance. Who was the backing of the banking and finance? The Venetians, Praetorians, Romans, and the Vatican Bank. That's how they retook the islands, because they bought nobles. They tied them up in wars that, Neron bankrupted them, and then they gave them loans. And they funded all kinds of social movements and social things in the country, right? This soft power, right? What I might or might not have gone to school as a Green Beret for, right? We learned all that, right? And ultimately they brought down the English-speaking peoples, and they enslaved them for, to this very day. Now we're trying in America to break free of all of that. But down underneath, we're English. We are English civilizational peoples. We speak bloody English. We follow common law, and we are a masculine, male, pub brawler peoples by nature. And the problem is we are susceptible when a pretty girl walks in the bar.
Those English football hooligans, Alex.
I have to say, I'm a little bit susceptible too when a pretty girl walks.
Okay, we need to finish up, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say in response to that?
Well, I have to say, my only regret about this conversation is that it's not taking place in a pub, because this would be one of the. Yeah, I greatly enjoyed this, and thank you, Ian, for you kind of opened a new horizon for me. This was very, very educational, so I really enjoyed it. I took some notes, but I look forward to having more of these conversations. This was really, really fascinating.
I would be honored. You, Alex, of all the people I hear out there talking, right? And I don't have a lot of time, as all of us, right? We do still have businesses and things we got to do and families.
Exactly.
You are the one walking the closest on in every conversation I'm hearing. It really impressed. Not that it matters but I'm really grateful to hear that there's another mind out there and another voice out there who's walking onto these things very careful, not getting emotional, not getting caught up in the whatever, the pretty girl stuff, right?
I try to keep that off the camera.
He's sensitive like that. Consider it. Well,
Rich, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, thank you both. And what I appreciate about both of you and what you're providing, and I think it's really, really important. And it's something that I do, taking it as from a fractal perspective down to the small scale. When I go into a household, there's what's going on in the surface. There's what everybody knows about and can see, and what everybody's shouting and screaming about and talking about. And then there's what's really going on in the background that's running the show, the machinations, the manipulations, the tactics that people are using to dominate or avoid domination and to survive and prevail. And, the conversations with both of you is we're looking at what's really going on in the background that's running the show and not being distracted and caught up in the superficial noise.
Yeah.
Alex, thank you so much. Ian, thank you so much. Links in the description below. Please go and follow them and follow their work, and come back and share this. We'll do this again and share and spread and all that business. Thank you very much.
All right, gentlemen.
Thank you, gents. Bye-bye.
Is this you? Low energy, low libido, no get up and go? Boost your testosterone naturally and rev up your engine with Immense Boost. bit.ly/CryptoRichBoost and order your testosterone boost today.